In 1984, 21-year-old Garry Kasparov wins the candidates tournament and earns the right to challenge the reigning world chess champion Anatoly Karpov. The match begins in September 1984 in Moscow, with Karpov dominating in the first 9 games. It's 4 victories and 5 draws. 4 victories meaning that Karpov was only 2 wins away from defending his title. The first player to reach 6 victories would win the championship. The next 17 games are drawn, Kasparov holding on in every single game, until game 27, which is another victory for Karpov. Now he's 1 win away from defending his title, but then comes game 32, the first ever game that Kasparov wins against Karpov. More draws follow until game 47 and 48, which are both victories for Kasparov. Now the result, can you still count? 5-3 in favor of Karpov. All these games, 48 games in total, have taken up 5 months. At this point, FIDE president Florencio Campomanes decides to abort the match, citing concerns about the health of the players. This was a controversial decision since both players would have preferred to continue playing. Up to today, to my filming day, this is the one and only World Chess Championship match that has ever ended without a result. A new match would be called. 7 months later, we are in September 1985, Moscow again, with a different format, the best of 24. 24 games to be played, and in case of a 12-12 result, Karpov would stay on the throne. Kasparov wins the first game, but Karpov bounces back in game 4 and 5 and takes the lead. Later, Kasparov starts winning more games, game 11, 16 and 19, and now it's a 2-point lead for the challenger. Karpov strikes back in game 22. Now it's still a 1-point lead for Kasparov, and we reach the crucial game 24. The result at this point is 12-11 in Kasparov's favor, which means that Karpov was in a must-win situation to defend his title. Let's see how the game happened. It's Karpov with the white pieces, and he started with 1 e4. During this match, he applied both e4 and d4 on the first move. Kasparov responds with his favorite opening, the Sicilian defense, and we soon reach the Najdorf variation. Karpov goes for the bishop e2 setup, and here both e5 and e6 are possible. Kasparov chooses e6, the Scheveningen system. Castle kingside, bishop e7, f4, castle, and king h1. This is a standard move in these variations. Queen c7, everything goes normal, a4, preventing b5, knight c6, bishop e3, and rook e8. This is still theory. Bishop f3, rook b8, and in this moment there are 2 main moves for white, either g4 immediately, launching a kingside attack, or the move that Karpov played, queen to d2. Bishop d7, finally black finishes his development, and after knight b3, b6. A hedgehog setup, as you can see from the pawn structure. Pawns on e6, d6, b6, and a6. g4. Finally, the kingside attack comes, as it's so typical in the bishop e2 variations against the Scheveningen. So at this point, it's already a big threat. g5, next move, and the knight has nowhere to go. Black needs to create some space for that f6 knight, and that comes with quite a funny move. You need to retreat the bishop to c8. But after b6, you see that there's a new square for this bishop. Bishop c8, bishop b7 actually makes a lot of sense, even if it looks funny. g5 still, of course, because that is white's plan, attacking on the king side. Knight goes back to d7, and now queen f2. This queen is heading toward the king side. Bishop to f8, bishop g2, another typical move. Now that the queen and the rook are on the f-file, often white can try to push f5 and attack the f7 square. Bishop to b7, rook a d8, the last piece that was unemployed, now puts pressure on the d-file, the semi-open d-file, and this d6 pawn. g6 and bishop c1. In this moment, I'm pretty sure that Karpov also considered f5, as I mentioned, having the queen and the rook on the f-file. It's quite tempting to try to push f5, but it's not obvious at all that white would achieve much with this advance. It looks dangerous, but it gives up the e5 square. As soon as you push the pawn, a knight can jump to e5, and this is a very strong defensive piece, defending the f7 square, just the point where white wanted to enter black's camp. So there's not much going on. If you take, black can simply take back. You cannot give a check on f7, and this pawn is defending the d5 square, which is crucial. So after f5, black never takes, especially not with the e-pawn. Giving up the d5 square is mortal. Black would be lost in these positions, but simply keeping the pressure, jumping to e5 with the knight is what black would have done after f5. So instead of f5, Karpov plays bishop c1, and you might wonder, what is that bishop doing on c1? So I give you a second, maybe 10 seconds, to pause the video and figure out what is the point behind this move. What is white's idea? What's the plan here? Pause the video and think about it. Here we go. I hope that you figured out that this bishop on e3 was blocking the third rank. Who would have thought that this rook is about to swing over to the king side? A rook on h3, queen on h4, mate attack on h7. Ta-dam! Bishop c1. That's a strong attacking move. Rook b to c8. Black needs to create counterplay, and his semi-open file is the c file. Rook coming to d3 as announced, knight b4, rook h3, and now an important defensive move, bishop g7. After pushing g6, of course, it's very normal that you want to create a fianchetto bishop. You need protection on the dark squares. And also, by placing the bishop on g7, you free the f8 square for the knight, which means that after queen h4, threatening to capture on h7, black could have simply played knight f8. Now, queen h4 did not happen because of this reason. This is all very safe around the black king. There's no attack anymore. Of course, white can try, but black has protected all the important squares. Therefore, after bishop g7, bishop e3 was played by Karpov, a new idea, aiming to exchange the dark square bishop that is protecting the black king. Rook e7. Now, this is a mysterious move. I will not ask you to pause the video, but if you want, you can. I would not have understood it. The point of this move is going to be seen on the next move, mainly. King g1 was played by Karpov, coming out of this long diagonal in case there will be a trade. He's aiming for f5, so if he pushes f5 and the e-pawn disappears, I believe he wanted to come out of the long diagonal. That's the reason I see for king g1. And now, rook c e8. So first, Kasparov played rook to e7, and now he brings the other rook to e8. I mean, why on earth would you want to double rooks on a not open file? There's a pawn on e6, right? The reason, the answer is prophylaxis. He is preventing f5 by doubling rooks on the e file. Let's just have a look. f5, if white decides to push f5, now you take with the e-pawn, opening up the e5 for the rooks, e takes f5, and after the capture on g2, king takes back, capture on c3, and knight to d5, suddenly black is winning. Black is winning material because of these double rooks. Attacking the bishop cannot go anywhere because of rook e2, winning the queen. So this position is just lost. There's no way of defending. You can try rook e1 and such. Go on and calculate those variations. Not so important for our game, but yes, doubling rooks on the e-file makes a lot of sense. And actually, the idea is already seen after rook e7. So if white wanted to push right after this move, rook e7, f5, before the other rook arrives on e8, it would have been very similar actually. E takes f5, e takes f5, bishop takes, check. Queen takes g2, and now after rook c e8, once again there's a lot of pressure on the e file. So f5 was not working thanks to this beautiful rook maneuver, rook e7 and then rook c to e8. White of course does not push f5. he plays rook d1. And you might wonder, okay, cool, we have prevented f5. But what is next? What's gonna happen now that we have double rooks on the e-file and no one is opening the e-file? Well, Kasparov made sure that those rooks would get some activity by pushing f5. So white did not push f5, it is black advancing his pawn to f5 and offering a trade on f6. White has to take on f6. If he does not, the position is already good for black, because the advance of this pawn means that now the e7 rook is defending on the 7th rank, so it's even less dangerous what white can create on the king side thanks to the defense on the 7th rank, plus this pawn is attacking the e4 pawn, so challenging white's center is important by having the bishop on the long diagonal, and later he can push his central pawns. f5 therefore has to be questioned whether g takes f6 is still okay for black, because the position is opening up close to the king. Bishop takes f6 would have been an option here for black. But instead of bishop takes f6, Kasparov decides to sacrifice a pawn. Knight takes f6. Now remember the circumstances, remember that the result at this point is 12-11 in favor of Kasparov. He only needs a draw to become world champion. And instead of playing for a draw, going for something very solid and exchanging pieces all the time, he goes for a crazy complex game, sacrificing a pawn. That is Kasparov. He said that he had to, of course, decide before the game what would his approach be. And knowing that he only needed a draw, he and his team could have thought that let's try to make it solid, let's try to play something safe. But that would have gone against his style, and it wouldn't have allowed him play his best chess. So he decided to go for a complex game, because that is what's true to him, to his style, to his strength. There he goes. Kasparov, needing only a draw, sacrificing a pawn, knight takes f6. Karpov could have taken on b6, attacking the queen, but this leads to a crazy complex variation. After bishop takes b6, knight g4 is very interesting. Both queens are hanging. You can take on c7, black takes on f2, now the rook on d1 is hanging and the rook on h3, so if you take on f2, simply black takes the bishop on c7, and even though black is a pawn down and no queens on the board, he has the pair of bishops and a lot of activity attacking on the c-file. The c2 pawn is hanging, he's also threatening sometimes with this capture depending on the circumstances. So this position is really complex and black has enough compensation for the pawn. After knight takes f2, perhaps the best move is therefore bishop takes d6, attacking black's rook as well. And if knight takes d1, bishop takes e7. But yeah, it's very complex, and Karpov had to calculate all this after knight takes f6, which must have come as a surprise in the game. I don't blame anyone, and certainly not the 12th world champion, for making an inaccurate move in this position. Bishop takes b6 was still, I believe, the strongest, and not according to me, but according to the engines. Of course, they are smarter than us, any of us. Rook g3 was played, which is not the best move in this position, and now, after rook f7, black is alright. Black has enough compensation, even if the pawn is captured. At this point, Karpov takes on b6, the queen drops back to b8 because he has to keep protecting the d6 square, but the queen is not passive on b8. Sometimes, by moving the b7 bishop, this b6 bishop of white could be hanging, so the queen on b8 is actually useful. Therefore, Karpov goes back immediately to e3, knight h5. Look at this, after rook s7, knight h5, suddenly there's a lot of attack on the f-file and against the f4 pawn. Rook to g4 and knight f6. The rook is hanging again. And now let's recall once again the circumstances. Can Karpov go back to g3 and allow knight h5, rook g4, knight f6, rook g3, knight h5? Objectively, this would have been the best option for white, perhaps. But he cannot repeat moves. He has to win. Karpov had to win this game with the white pieces to defend his title. He cannot go for the repetition of moves, even if that is the best move in the position. This is the 65th square on the board. The draw odds. Kasparov can make a draw, Karpov cannot. Therefore, in the game, after rook g4, knight f6, he plays rook h4. And now I want you to pause the video and try to channel your inner Kasparov. What do you think is the move that Garry Kasparov played in this moment with a pawn down? Try to figure it out. Welcome back. I hope that you have discovered the brilliant attacking idea played by Kasparov, and that is g5. A second pawn sacrifice in order to tear up the position. F takes g5, knight g4 attacking both the queen and the bishop, knight takes e3, queen e3, and now he wins back one of the pawns, but this is not the end of the story. Here, the d6 pawn is hanging and the c2 knight is misplaced, basically trapped. So what was the point of all this? Well, the next move, bishop a8. This is the point of the g5 pawn push. Offering a trade of queens, as after queen takes b8, rook takes b8, black is a pawn down, but he is about to win back material. The knight is hanging, the pawn on b2 will drop, plus this bishop on the long diagonal is extremely strong. White can fight still, of course, this is unclear after bishop h3, rook takes b3, bishop takes e6, but black is at least equal here, if not better. Instead, after bishop a8, Karpov made a blunder, and that was rook takes d6. Forgetting about rook b7, cashing in on the b file, the knight is dropping after the queen moves. In fact, after queen takes a6, Kasparov could have won the rook with knight b4, the queen needs to abandon the 6th rank, and this d6 rook drops. The game was queen takes a6, rook takes b3, also winning, of course, it's a piece up for black. Rook takes e6, Karpov is trying to collect some pawns to compensate for the lack of the piece. And here is the only moment when Kasparov made a mistake, rook takes b2. Easy to say for me because I check it with the engine. This was a mistake because of allowing queen c4. And this is a horrible threat, threatening mate, rook takes e8. King h8, and now, if Karpov had taken on e8, rook takes e8 check, queen takes e8, there's a very complex and long variation that would have led to a draw, probably. Knight d1, I mean, who thinks about knight d1 in this position? The point is that these pieces are tangled. You need to play knight a3 in order to keep the material up that you have, the piece. Queen d3, now still the rook and the knight are hanging. Rook a2, the only way to defend both pieces. And here, g6. After h6, rook takes h6. No, I did not see this. I checked it with the engine. Bishop takes h6 and queen c3. White is a rook and a piece down in this position, and the engine says it's 0, 0, 0. You either give perpetual repeat moves, queen h3 and such, with bishop h6, or king g8, queen b3, so you win the rook on a2. Or repeat moves. You can do both. Now, the problem for Karpov is that even if he had gone for this variation, even if he had seen that he has a draw here, remember, he could not make a draw. He needed to win this game. And the winning chances here with a piece down, even if he has a lot of pawns for the piece, this is not realistic at all. Still, this was the best move after queen c4, king h8, rook takes e8, and this complex variation with sacrifices. A rook sacrifice on h6 that I have just showed you. Instead, in the game after king h8, what happened was e5, and this leads to a forcing variation that wins on the spot, queen a7 check, king h1, now bishop takes g2 check, drawing the king to the 2nd rank, after which knight d4 discovered check, and next move, we are taking the rook on e6. So it's going to be a rook and a piece up for black. Karpov resigned. And that meant that Garry Kasparov, on the 9th of November in 1985, becomes the youngest world chess champion in history. Make sure to check out the rest of their games from this match and the other matches. They have played 5 matches in total, Kasparov and Karpov, 144 games. Great rivalry and such instructive games, the two very different styles facing each other. I just love analyzing Karpov-Kasparov games in general, so make sure to study more of their games, and I hope that you have enjoyed this one, Game 24, the one that gave Kasparov the world title.